On today's prop tutorial, I'm going to be showing you guys how to create Ramona Flowers Hammer. Goodness gracious, that's big. What's up everybody? I'm Josh Long, and welcome to this episode of Behind the Frame, the show where we show you guys how to create some awesome props and special effects from your favorite TV shows, movies, games, and more. On this episode, we're going to be showing you how to create Ramona Flowers Hammer from the Scott Pilgrim vs. the World movie. You guys are going to be pretty proud of what you end up doing. I know I was pretty proud of the end product of this, so sit back and just relax, and then see how to create this gargantuan piece of weaponry. Oh boy, it's big. The scene where this hammer gets used in the movie is where Ramona, Scott Pilgrim, and the rest of the band entourage are attending an after party. Then, bam, this person comes out of nowhere and starts to attack Scott Pilgrim. But he is not without help. Ramona Flowers comes out of nowhere, and then bam! No sir. She pulls out from her subspace pack this huge hammer, which quite literally its name is the Large Hammer. Yep, the Large Hammer. So far as the supplies that I used for this build, it's not as elaborate as some of my other builds in the past, mainly because the wood. Just lots of wood. We're cutting trees and making them into beautiful weapons. So far as the shopping list goes, there are going to be two varying prices. One is going to be the overall cost, including tools if you don't have them, because I hate every time something comes up and it's like, tool I already had, and I'm like, but I don't have that tool. So here's what you guys are going to need. A table saw, a drill press, a jigsaw, a palm sander, detail sander, and belt sander, and a Dremel tool. My supplies included scissors, ruler, pencil, and poster board. Those are pretty cheap, like $1, so you're good to go there. Acrylic paints, wood glue, super glue, fishing line, a large bell, metallic beads, various sandpapers, clamps. Lord knows you need lots of clamps. A Forstner drilling bit, I used a 1.5 inch bit. Spray paint, those vary in price depending on what kind you get, obviously. Wood filler, a putty knife for the wood filler, a wooden poplar dowel rod, and now let's get into the wood planks that you'll need. The sizes I used are 1 inch by 12 inch by 4 foot, a 1 inch by 6 inch by 4 foot, a 1 inch by 4 inch by 4 foot, and finally a 1/2 inch by 6 inch by 3 foot. Now let's move to the handle, the first part of the build. You'll see that on the handle, and also in the reference pictures, this was very important, there are notches, not necessarily just lines in the handle, and they're about a 1/2 inch apart from each other. And that'll vary depending on like how thick your table saw blade is, which is a tool I ended up using for this. And as you'll see, the detail of the notches are split into thirds along the length of the handle itself. The top and bottom thirds of the handle have the notches, whereas the middle third, that's completely smooth. I got the notches done on this handle with my table saw, but with any kind of power tools concerned, always take some kind of safety precaution, because you want to protect your eyeballs, your ear holes, and even your footwalkers, if you will. When getting to the actual work of making the notches in the handle, you want to set your table saw blade not too high at all, because you don't want to compromise the strength of the actual handle itself, because you're going to be lifting a pretty heavy load. You want enough just to get the detail in there. And if you actually mess up on it, that's actually going to it'll work out just fine, so don't like wig out, because you're going to wear and tear the handle anyway in some of the later steps. But fear not, if you guys don't have a table saw, that's totally fine. You can just use a Dremel tool. But same thing with the table saw, exercise caution please, because you don't want to cut off one of your fingers. You still want to be able to enjoy the build and not be like, oh, my finger's gone. But if you're even lazier than that, like super level lazy, like I'm surprised I'm even watching this video right now, you can go and get some masking tape And then just mark off again like every ½ inch, remembering your thirds in the pole. And then paint some black rings around it. But I would actually wait to do that after you do like your wear and tear, like your weathering look on the pole, so that your black lines don't get smudged and then you're like, it didn't turn out as well because I'm so lazy. That's right. You are lazy. Let's move to the bling of the hammer. How'd you do that? I'ma tell you. So far as the handle's concerned in the reference picture, I did notice that there was a little tassel at the end with a little bell. This is a separate piece that I actually had to glue onto it. But I took my drill press and I had varying drill bits on there. The initial one on the inside of it, like from the bottom almost all the way up, that was a size just big enough for one of the beads to go through. And then on the top, I drilled a hole just big enough for the fishing line to go through. So that you feed your fishing line through, you bead the bead together, and you pull that tight in a nice knot, and then you have your nice little anchor piece for the bling. Once you got all your beads, and it's just super glued onto there, I use super glue and a little bit of wood glue so it has a nice actual anchor into it. And then just tie those onto the bell, that's your ballless bell, and then you're good to go. Now that you have the tassel on the end of the handle, now it's time for sanding, painting, and weathering. Oh fun. When you sand the dowel, you want to start off with about 100 grit, which is kind of coarse, and then that's just enough to get any kind of excess stuff off from the notches that you have created on it. Then you take a progressively finer sand grit to make it kind of semi-smooth but not like slick. But once your sanding is nice in the way that you like it, then you take some brown paint just as a base and then just kind of smear that over. You take some sandpaper again. I would choose the coarse kind so that you don't wear off too much and you can kind of have more of a control over how weathered the piece is. Up near the top, you can kind of see it's a little lighter through here, and I also did the same at the bottom around that area. So it kind of looks like it was actually worn before it was just nicely neat and built in your garage or place of preference. A great combination for weathering a piece is also something called washing. It's very simple, where you just take some paint of your choice or color. I ended up choosing black, and then you just dilute it with some water, and then just in a little container. And I use a chip brush because the bristles are kind of everywhere, so it gives kind of uneven, scraggly look to it instead of a nice uniform weathering, which is kind of an oxymoron if you think about it. Brush some strokes on there, it'll get the highlights of what you've actually like weathered, and then especially the notches, that turned out nice. And then just wipe off real quick the top of it. So the smooth parts won't have the paint on it, but it'll just kind of age it a little bit. Remember this painting process because we'll be using it on two other pieces. One will be this connector piece from the hammerhead to the actual handle. It's this thicker kind of dowel around there. And then that little end cap piece. This is actually not one whole dowel piece. It's 3 pieces of wood that I cut to that shape. So I just took some scrap wood that I actually used on this same build from the pieces. Once I had those glued together all nice and neat, I took it to my belt sander, and then I just kind of carefully, a little bit at a time, got it all nice and uniform. So it did look like just a big dowel piece. To give your build some more structure into it, you don't want to just connect this piece to the handle. You actually want to drill through that into the hammerhead itself. It should fit your dowel nicely depending on how carefully you ended up drilling. And then take a little bit of wood glue on the inside of it near the bottom of the connector piece, and then shimmy it down to the handle about 2 inches from like the first notch where that starts. Now that your handle is complete, let's move on to the head of the beast. With the reference pictures, there wasn't a very clean and crisp picture of the hammerhead itself, which was kind of a bummer, but I ended up making my own template, which worked out pretty well. And since we love you guys so much, we included a link to that template in the description below. Oh goody, it's for you! If you guys want to take on the challenge of making your own template, I would highly suggest using poster board for your tracing medium, because it actually retraces really well over and over and over again. The best way to make the template nice and symmetrical, especially involving your side angles and the top curve, is to take 1/2 of the template and then draw that out perfectly, or just what you think is perfect, And then what we ended up doing is taking that half, cutting that out first with a center line, and then over that center line just kind of folding it and then carefully tracing that out as well, which created the whole template. Then we snip, 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 and the whole thing is cut out. Then all you have to do once your template is created and cut out, you just trace those out onto the wood to get the top curve of the handle perfectly. What worked best for me was that I took that template and then I traced out the top curve of it onto some pieces of wood, the 2 extra planks that I had. And then I had just kind of a sloppy inch-ish line underneath it. And then I actually glued all of those pieces together. Since the jigsaw tool that I ended up using has a habit of changing the angle of its blade, I actually took that in mind and then just cut a little further away from the line I had already transferred from the template for the top curve. But with the straighter lines, I just ended up using my table saw. To cut the shape for the smaller sides of the hammer, I took my 1 inch by 6 inch piece of wood and I cut about 8 inches so far as length for that. And then the width was actually helped by the width of the 2 faces of the hammer. So that gave you a 8 inch by 7 inch hammer face or side piece. Before I glued everything together on the 2 side pieces, I took the table saw and adjusted the blade to 45 degrees and then just cut those out so they would match my template line. I cut the base in roughly the same way that I did the 2 smaller sides of the hammer. I used the 6 inch piece of wood, once again, that was the 1/2 inch by 6 inch piece, and then I cut 11 inches there. While I was cutting out the piece for the base, I was mindful of the handle going into the hammerhead itself for an anchor point. So, since the handle I wanted to go about 5 inches into the hammerhead, which was pretty good to me, I took over 5 inches of just scrap piece of wood and stacked those up as close to the center as I could on the inside of the base. And then I just wood glued those together, waited for those to dry. Once that was done, I just took my drill press with the same kind of bit, the 1.5 inch, and I just bored a hole through it. Gluing the top piece of the curve was kind of difficult, but we figured out a way that worked out best. Because when working with wood pieces and wood glue, the wood glue wants to just slide the 2 pieces all around like some kind of crazy earthquake. And I didn't want that. I wanted some nice structure to it. So I took 3 pieces at a time, and then I just glued those all nice and neat, and then the final product, I used my clamps on that as well, once those 2 pieces of 3 dried. With all of your pieces of wood cut out and finalizing the angles, you glue them together, for the exception of the top piece, the top arch. You wait till everything else is glued together and dried. Because you want a nice snug fit, you just kind of take a rubber mallet and then just tap it in really nice and easy as you have wood glue on the sides of the arch. If you guys end up having a stupid jigsaw like I did, it will take a little while to actually sand things down, which is what I had to end up doing for a while with my belt sander. That was a long time. Once everything is all glued together and you're finished sanding everything nice and smooth, you take it to the table saw, again with the 45-degree angle, and then you finish up the beveled edges on the sides of the smaller pieces. If on the top, like we did, you end up with some divots here and there, don't worry, that's what the wood filler is for. You just take a little bit of wood filler and it goes a long way. And then you just take the putty knife and then spread it nice and smooth all across the divots on the hammerhead top. And then you just sand that smooth like you would a normal piece of wood. And now we're on the home stretch. Time for painting and sealing. Oh boy! If while you're painting, you wanted to paint the hammerhead first and then glue the handle into it, that is totally fine. But what we ended up doing is just gluing the handle into the hammerhead already and then just taking some painter's tape and then masking off that area enough so that no part of the handle got silver paint on it. The painting method that you want to use to give it a nice stone look is a twofold process. One is the actual paint, and then 2 is the actual just beating the crud out of the hammer. The order that you want to paint the hammerhead in is very important. You sand down the entirety of the hammerhead in much of the same way that you actually did the handle, and then you take about 3 coats of primer, starting off with a dust coat, which is just a very light coat. Then you do 2 more follow-up coats, following the instructions labeled on your specific spray paint. After the primer is nice and dry to the touch, you will want to start the actual coloring of it. I ended up using some chrome duplicolor spray paint. I followed up using the chrome spray paint with the 3 coats, the same as I did the primer, just to give the whole hammerhead a nice cover of paint. After the chrome has about 3 nice coats on it, then you want to take the enamel, and then I sprayed about 4 or 5 coats all over it, and then that kind of grayed up the color a little bit, and then we beat the crud out of it with a rock. What fun! After you beat your hammerhead senseless, you want to take a little bit of like flat black spray paint and then just kind of spritz that over. Not actually like coating the thing or coloring it black, but just enough to kind of accent little pieces. And it'll actually turn out pretty good. Before you finish up, you want to make that little cap that goes on the end. Remember the paint job that we told you earlier with the weathering and the black washing? Do that same thing with cutting out a piece that's, again, the size of a spray paint can lid. Do that, paint it up all nice and weathered, or bad and weathered if you'd actually want to say it that way. After you cut out the top cap, there is one little detail left. It's that white little strip right at the top. It goes through the middle of the cap. You take just a random piece of scrap wood. Mine actually ended up being the right size, so I just sanded smooth the edges a little bit on it to give it a nice little curve instead of just a block or a rectangle. And then you just super glue and a dab of wood glue that on top of the cap. Then repeat the same process to attach it to the top of the hammer, making sure that it's really well aligned, because you don't want a cap that's like off the end of the hammer. It has to be in line with where the handle would go if it went all the way through the hammerhead. After you have the end cap glued onto the hammerhead itself, then it's time for the final details. You go and then you spray about 3 or 4 coats of the enamel over the entirety of the piece, hammerhead and the handle. For the detailing piece right here and here, all along those edges, I took the same duplicolor chrome spray paint, which I used for the entirety of the head. You just take like a piece of paper towel and then spray just all over the paper towel, and then just rub it across the edge there, and then repeat the same process on this side, and you have all your paint done. Your hammer is finished. Good job. If you didn't actually like make the hammer, good job on watching the video. You sat for a while. Kudos. If you like this build, please like and subscribe to our channel, and go ahead and feel free to leave comments in the section below of other builds and tutorials that you would like us to do for y'all. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And for NerdSync Productions, I'm Josh Long. Thanks for joining us on Behind the Frame. This build's done! Woo! If you guys don't have a big table saw, like I ended up get some fishing line, because that is gonna hang. Now to move on to, it's called web. I don't want just to give your build. Put a link in the description. I said description. It's a very nice looking name. I'm gonna start over with that. The hammerhead was already